Hi everyone, good morning. We're about to start our Facebook Live Q&A about multi-stakeholder forums. If you give us a minute, we'll formally start. I'm here with IEP member Ernesto Velasco, and I'm Emilene Martinez from the OGP Support Unit. ¿Ese es el hip-hop? No.
No, este es el hip-hop. Este es el hip-hop.
Ok. ¿Empezamos? No, tenemos 3.
Just one more minute.
Yes, one more minute and we'll start. Remember, if you want to continue this conversation in Twitter, we're using the hashtag OGP Collaborate. So please use it if you want to discuss multi-stakeholder forums and OGP collaboration further.
Here is morning in Mexico City. A
Yes.
few clouds.
It was raining a lot.
It was raining a lot. But fortunately today the weather is good.
Yes.
Sí.
Okay. Well, again, my name is Emilene Martinez, and I'm OGP's America's Regional Civil Society Coordinator, and welcome to our first OGP Facebook Live Q&A. I'm here with IEP member Ernesto Velasco,
Good morning.
and during the next hour, we will be discussing with the OGP community how to design and manage a multi-stakeholder forum. This is a Q&A, and Ernesto and I will briefly introduce first our research on multi-stakeholder forums, and then open up the floor for questions. You can interact with us and ask questions by commenting on this post. Again, we're using the hashtag OGP Collaborate in Twitter. As you know, collaboration between government and civil society is the cornerstone of the Open Government Partnership. OGP's consultation guidelines ask countries to identify an existing or a new forum to enable regular multi-stakeholder forum consultation on OGP implementation. As of September, 43 countries participating in the partnership have an active, structured environment in which government and civil society maintain an ongoing dialogue regarding national OGP processes. At the support unit, we sought to capture the rich and varied experiences of these structured forums through a series of tools designed for the OpenGov community. Our first tool is designing and managing an OGP multi-stakeholder forum, which is a practical handbook with guidance and ideas to help government and civil society actors meet the minimal co-creation standards and go a step further by developing more ambitious mechanisms to enhance multi-stakeholder collaboration. In this handbook, author Ernesto Velasco, here with me, shows us different approaches to create a forum and recruit participants, manage the operations of the forum, develop the national action plan, and promote open government principles beyond the OGP. To accompany the handbook, we also put together a database in which we sought to capture basic information regarding existing forums, including how the forum was established, the participants in the forum, the selection of civil society participants, and roles and responsibilities. You can find all of this in our webpage in the tools section. We have provided all of these materials in ready-to-print PDFs and in open data formats so that the community can use the research and databases at their convenience. These contents are licensed as a Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 and can be shared and used and reused. We also have the handbook available in an EPUB format that you can read and consult in your tablet and smartphone. Ernesto here is going to show us the EPUB format. It's really friendly. You can read it in your tablet. You can also read it in your smartphone. And finally, I would like to stress the fact that as in all things OGP, there is no one recipe for success. So we will be portraying best practices that can be adapted to local contexts, and we're not just giving a recipe of how things should be done. Now Ernesto will give us a brief introduction to the handbook, and remember, you can interact with us and ask questions by commenting on this post. Thank you.
Thank you, Milena. Good morning to everyone. Well, the handbook has the idea of giving to the OGP community overview of the main issues, the main challenges, and sometimes problems that you have to face when you try to establish a good performing multi-stakeholder forum around OGP. We began by doing a bit of research about how countries have been establishing and have managed those sorts of forums, and we sent an electronic survey to points of contact and to the IRM researchers in order to have a clearer view of how they establish the forum, how many people do participate in their meetings, how often do they participate, and other characteristics of each of these countries' multi-stakeholders forum. We had a response of 33 people answering the survey, and from that and from research made by other parties like the Princeton University and others, we try to have a clearer view of how multi-stakeholders forums in OGP have been working and their main features. All that knowledge was used to develop a document that is aimed to provide a sort of toolkit for practitioners, very action-oriented, that can help you to navigate the challenges of establishing a multi-stakeholder forum in the OGP context. So that's basically the background of this document. Now, the idea of the structure of the document is that you can follow the different steps or the different phases that you have to deal with during establishing and managing a multi-stakeholder forum. So it's intended to be very user-friendly, to give you a very practical set of information and tools in order to facilitate your work within the OGP, establishing the OGP multi-stakeholder forum. And that's more or less what the document contains.
Thank you, Ernesto, and thank you all for joining us. We have participants from Costa Rica, from Brazil. We have a representative of the Costa Rican multi-stakeholder forum. Ernesto, we've had, as you know, several workshops around multi-stakeholder forums, and there are a bunch of questions that people ask us all the time. So a question that I wanted to ask you is, what are the main challenges that people face when they seek to establish one of these multi-stakeholder forums?
Well, let me begin by separating the challenges in two. The first batch of challenges is related to establishing the forum. And I think the main challenge there is to decide or to convey the stakeholders that have to participate in the forum, who should be represented and how they are going to be reached out and made aware of the existence of the forum, and how do you promote an active participation from government officials, but also from civil society in general. So the main challenge, I think, is to establish who is going to represent each of the sectors that are participating in the OGP process nationally. And that's a huge challenge in many countries because, for example, the structure of government is not thought to be horizontal, but more vertical. And then you have to include in the OGP forum key public officials that have the capacity to coordinate across government, across organizational boundaries within government, so that the priorities that are the most important in the country, in the context of OGP, can be implemented afterwards. And then you have to invite civil society to propose the representatives from the civil society, and that is also a challenge in many countries because civil society can be less well articulated in some parts. You may have a concentration of civil society organizations in some areas, so you have to establish a good process in order to select or elect or appoint the civil society organizations with the active participation of the civil society itself.
Okay, thank you, Ernesto. So we have a question from Abdelaziz Abid. He's asking, according to the Articles of Governance, the forum is dedicated to the implementation period, but the handbook seems to expand it to all the NAP cycle. Is there a need to make up Articles of Governance to get consistency with the handbook?
Well, in fact, the work is being done on that respect, and so soon you will have news about an improved version of the Articles of Governance. But let me take a step back and say, multi-stakeholder forum, of course, they have a minimum set of tasks that it has to address, but in many countries, the fact that you have a multi-stakeholder forum has the potential to go beyond the strict tasks that were laid out in the Articles of Governance. For example, we say in the handbook that in many countries, the OGP multi-stakeholder forum promotes open government even beyond the National Action Plan. And they try to promote and be an active cheerleader for other actions and other projects that are related to open government, to openness in general, that may not have been included in the National Action Plan, but through discussion, through stakeholder consultation, well, they are regarded as a priority. So the multi-stakeholder forum has a more of a leadership role within the OGP community in that country.
Yeah, and if I may, before we go to Abdelaziz's next question, we have Ignacio Alfaro from Costa Rica from their Multi-Stakeholder Commission, and they actually used the commission to be active in the passage of an FOI law in Costa Rica, which was not part of the OGP action plan. So there we have a concrete example, and perhaps Ignacio could help us out in the comment and telling us what you guys did in Costa Rica, because I think it's a very interesting example. Abdelaziz's next question is, does the fact that the author belonged to the IRM mean that the handbook will be a basis of the NAP assessments?
Not really, because the handbook doesn't lay out principles or policies in itself. It really lays out different options that you have to consider in your national context. So no, it's not going to be related to the methodology of the IRM. The IRM methodologies are established by the procedures manual, and that hasn't changed. So the short answer is no.
Yeah, and as we mentioned in the beginning, the handbook doesn't really want to establish concrete guidelines and tell you a recipe of how you should do things. We just sought to capture best practices out there so you can adapt all of these practices to your local context and perhaps improve on what we have researched. Ignacio from Costa Rica is asking us if we have found that from the government side, the presidency, the treasury, and planning ministries have a seat at the table?
Well, it depends on the country. What I would say is that it is important to have in the table the people that can make decisions that are crucial to the design and to the implementation of the national action plan. So in many countries, if you have a separate body that does planning and a separate body that does budgeting, it would be wise to try to include them in the whole OGP process in the country, because if not, you are going to have a disconnection between the national planning, programming, and budgeting processes and the OGP National Action Plan cycle. So if you want to reconcile it as much as possible, it is a good idea to have them there discussing and giving input. Yes.
Thank you, Ernesto. We had another question in one of our events, and it's related to rotation on and off the forum for civil society and perhaps even for government. Did you observe any good practices during your research?
Yeah. Well, what I must say is that that's the area where the major weaknesses that we identified are embedded. Most of the countries do not have policy or guidelines or procedures to deal with turnover and to induce new members into the OGP community, OGP stakeholder forum, sorry. What I would say is that you have to be active in that respect. And a promising practice is to have documents that can be used to induce new members of the stakeholder forum to know about what's the role of the forum, what's the role of the different members of the forum, so that it is not so, the learning curve is not so burdensome, and they can integrate in the collective effort more easily. So if you document what have you been doing within the forum, if you have clear rules of engagement and you put them, make available to the new members, that is a good idea. Even other things like having regular meetings off-site in a secluded place that you can have a kind of a more social bonding experience, that also helps in many instances.
And Ernesto, related to that question, and we've seen this in several countries, it's a question that we get all the time. So we have this forum that you explain in the handbook where you have government and civil society representatives.
Yes.
But do you think it's a good practice to have separate forums or instances where deliberations are just made by government officials and then separately by civil society?
Well, it depends on how the country's relations between civil society and government are, the health of that relation is, and secondly, it's about the complexity of government itself. So, for me, it's a good idea that government can have their own space to coordinate within government, and then have a common position in the stakeholder forum. That is can be helpful. But as a good practice or promising practice, I haven't seen the silver bullet to address that problem. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the government forum gains such an importance that the forum with the civil society is not taken care of or is not well managed. So I would say that as much as you can, you have to rely in the common OGP forum with stakeholders from both government and civil society, and try to make decisions there and not trying to have another space where really the decisions are made and the stakeholder forum is just rubber stamping things that are decided somewhere else. I think that's the danger of having two separate forums.
So you would recommend that the forum is the one place where you make decisions, and perhaps the others are where people strategize?
Yes, more of an operational coordination of implementing, for example, national action plan commitments, but trying to have the strategic decisions in the multi-stakeholder forum.
Okay, thank you, Ernesto. And we have more questions from participants. Aiden Daniel is asking, will the IRM review the strength of the forum and the degree to which independent CSOs are able to participate?
Now in a way, they are being assessed about that, maybe indirectly, but in the OGP's participation guidelines and the IRM procedures manual, there is some criteria to assess the quality of the consultation for the drafting of the National Action Plan and for the implementation of the National Action Plan. So, in fact, that's being assessed already. And in the future, maybe the new guidance will be even more specific about those two phases of participation within the national OGP process. But now you should go to the OGP website and take a look to both to the participation guidelines and to the procedures manual, because there you will find the criteria that is used to assess that.
Okay, thank you, Ernesto. We have another question from Aiden. Will all OGP member countries be required to have such a forum going forward?
Well, yes. It's already there. Maybe it's not spelled out in that way. However, this doesn't mean that it has to be a new space. You can use existing forums or existing mechanisms that already exist within your country, if they are or they have the characteristics that are horizontal and they are non-hierarchical and promote participation, active participation, etc. So if you already have in law or by administrative decisions a forum, you can use it to perform the tasks that are mentioned. We have mentioned that the OGP multi-stakeholder forums do. So yes, you will have to have some sort of space, forum, of mechanism to have participation from civil society and government, to co-produce the implementation of the action plan, but it doesn't mean that you have to have a new structure or a exclusive dedicated space only for OGP. It can you can have different recipes to doing this, and it depends on your country and the context, the institutional context, the legal context of your country.
Perfect. Thank you, Aiden, for your questions. For those of you who have just joined, I'm Emilene Martinez from the OGP Support Unit. I'm here with Ernesto Velasco from the IEP, and we're discussing multi-stakeholder forums. If you want to ask us a question or interact, please comment in this post. We have another question from one of our events, and this comes up a lot. So how do you choose which civil society organizations are going to be a part of the forum?
Well, that's one of the biggest challenges there when you are trying to establish a multi-stakeholder forum. What I would say is that it depends on the country's context. And the first thing I would like to address is to say, well, you shouldn't choose. Civil society should have a way to decide by itself who should represent it. However, we are aware, and the handbook makes clear that the way civil society is articulated in different countries can be challenging for having an election or very open processes, because in many ways you could skew participation towards certain cities, for example, or regions, because they have a more organized civil society, and you will be living out other sectors of society or other regions. So you have to strike the right balance between taking advantages of the strengths of your civil society, their capacities and their resources, and trying to expand representation within the OGP community in the country, so that local communities or local grassroots organizations can have access to what is going on in OGP in that country. So that's a huge challenge, and it depends mainly on the context of each country.
Perfect, thank you. So we have a question from our own support unit, Madeline Weber. Are there successful experience of participation from the private sector in these forums?
Well, I can think of Peru.
Mm-hmm.
In Peru, the multi-stakeholder forum included representation from the chambers of commerce and the entrepreneurs sector. So from the beginning, it was understood that civil society will include active participation from the private sector. Of course, it depends on the relations between civil society, government, and the private sector in each country. How much the multi-stakeholder forum can include a specific representation from that sector. So in the most of the countries do not have a special chair for the private sector. They include them with the rest of the civil society. But in some instances, such as Peru, they do have a special representation within the forum. And again, it depends on the degree of involvement of the private sector in the OGP process. Unfortunately, one of the main challenges in OGP has been how to promote the interest and then the participation of the private sector in this within this community. We have had some good experiences about that, but I think we still have a big challenge ahead of us, and in the coming years we should be putting more attention to involving the private sector in these processes.
Yeah, and this is an ongoing piece of research, and we're really interested in knowing more about your experiences. So if you have any successful experiences involving the private sector, either in the forum or just in the process, please let us know that in the comments, because we really think it's an important area which we really haven't explored.
Yeah.
And just a follow-up that I'd like to ask you is, so we talked about the private sector, and I know there are countries where academia has also been involved. Did you see any particular cases?
Well, yes. For example, in Romania or even in Uruguay, this multi-stakeholder forum had this idea of involving specific stakeholders when specific issues were addressed, and they invited experts to their discussions when these issues were discussed. And I think that's a good idea, because it's very difficult to have knowledge about everything. Even within a multi-stakeholder forum, that you have a broader set of skills and knowledge within the participants. There are many areas in the OGP processes that are very specialized. Just imagine environment or extractive industries, etc. They are technically very complex issues. So by using the possibility of inviting experts, of involving higher education institutes or institutions and researchers and experts, well, the discussions would be more informed and could be even more productive because the expert could see some options that maybe the participants, the regular participants in the multi-stakeholder forum haven't seen or are not aware of. For example, in Mexico, when they were developing their action plan in 2013, the discussions in the consultation forums started with an expert that developed a sort of a diagnosis of the situation, of the problem in different areas. And after the expert had laid out the framework of what are the challenges within this policy area, then the stakeholders began their discussion of how to address that with open government tools and strategies. So that was very interesting to see, and then you have a more informed with a stronger background discussions than if you just go there and start saying things without any sort of research or data.
Thank you, Ernesto. We have another question from Aziz Abed from Morocco. Some countries have OGP steering committees, others no. In regard to the forum issue, what is the benefit of a steering committee?
Well, there are, of course, benefits and challenges with that. I think that it's a good idea in terms of having equal leadership, co-leadership between government and civil society. So having a steering committee with balanced representation, with co-chairs that belong to both sectors, encourages and empowers civil society within the OGP process in the national context. However, as I said before, some countries had already some sort of structure that was already existing and was used, taken advantage of, to host the OGP process in that country. And that has the advantage of reconciling the existing normative, administrative and legal environment of the country with the OGP process so that they can be more coordinated among themselves. So yes, it has advantages, but the challenge would be how to coordinate the decisions of this steering committee with the regular government processes, especially planning, programming, and budgeting.
Okay.
So how do you make that link will be, I think that you should consider very careful.
Very well. Now we have new participants from Peru, for example, that also has a very interesting commission. So we want to hear from you, Peru. We have a couple of questions from Adi and Daniel. Do you think that most countries have already formed a platform between government and civil society that meets regularly to draft national action plans and then plan their implementation?
Well, when we did the survey more than a year ago, I must say, that was one of the challenges we were facing. There were a significant number of countries that had a permanent multi-stakeholder forum, but many of them, even most of them, didn't. And that may be because in the first steps within the OGP community were mainly focused on developing their national action plan. And you know that that's a huge effort to draft the plan in a co-creation mode. It's very challenging. So most of the energy in the country was aimed at developing and drafting the national action plan. And when they had their national action plan published, then the effort diminished. There was no continuity in many cases of that sort of energy and participation, and in many countries they had to wait until drafting the next action plan to have again, to convey again the different stakeholders. So yes, it was a challenge. At that time, we had many countries that didn't have a multi-stakeholder forum, but now I think this is improving quite significantly. So I don't have the numbers to this date.
Yeah, last we did a review with our regional coordinators and support unit staff. We found 43 and a couple of other cases that were in progress. That it's either existing forums or new ones, and with different characteristics. But we did ask government and civil society if they thought it would qualify as one.
Well, that's a huge improvement from a year ago. Yes.
And Aiden Daniel also asked us, or do countries convene such gatherings only ad hoc around National Action Plan drafting time?
Well, the idea of a permanent multi-stakeholder dialogue is exactly to have a forum that convenes regularly beyond the drafting of the National Action Plan. The main task they have to address in the midterm is making sure that the commitments of the action plan are in fact implemented. So this stakeholder forum plays the role of a monitoring mechanism to make sure that the commitments that were included in the National Action Plan are being actually acted upon. So that will be the main task that this forum has to address. And then you have to decide how often do you meet, how often do you have a meeting and discuss the progress of the action plans, etc. So there are many different ways of deciding how often do we meet. Some meet almost every week. No? They don't have a calendar, but they meet as it's required. Others go to the other extreme and meet just twice a year, and that's it. The most common was to meet every 2 months or every 3 months. So that's more or less the most frequent periods of regular meetings. And then you can have the regular meetings and the non-regular meetings that are decided upon the demands of the OGP implementation process.
Ernesto, when reading the handbook, and perhaps others agree with me, we saw that there was a huge variety in the amount of meetings that these forums had. As you said, every 2 weeks. I saw another one that met every year. But I also saw a lot of variety in how big the forums are. I've seen forums that are very small with perhaps just 3 participants. And then forums like the Sierra Leone one, which had over 30. So we got a question from our regional civil society coordinator in Asia. Is there an ideal size for these forums?
Well, I don't like to think about the perfect number of participants because there is no rule. I must say, first of all, it depends on the complexity of your national action plan. If it is a 100 commitment action plan that involves 32 government institutions, well, you may need more people in participating actively in the multi-stakeholder forum. So the first thing you have to consider is, yes, how complex, how big is your national action plan. Second, of course, as you include more people in the multi-stakeholder forum, discussions take longer, blockage begin to be an issue, even having the same sort of agreements or underlying concepts about what's up in government and what's the role of the multi-stakeholder forum becomes more difficult. So I would aim to have a balance between the people that has to be in the table because the commitments of the action plan require to have them, and the need to make this a manageable forum that doesn't include 100 people, because that's not a forum, that's an assembly, and that's other thing. One way to deal with this is to have a sort of central small stakeholder forum, and then you have monitoring sub-forums that are specialized in monitoring specific commitments within the action plan. So you have a sort of two-layer structure where you have a strategic and more general forum with very important stakeholders there, but maybe not the experts. And then you have a smaller or a second layer of forums with people that is more specialized in specific commitments that can monitor their implementation in a more effective way.
Thank you, Ernesto. We have people joining us from Guatemala who also has an experience. We have the IRM researcher. Hello, Diego. Any comments that you could add to the post regarding the Guatemalan experience are very, very welcome. We have another question from Jacqueline McGraw. Are there instances where external funders have supported the establishment of such forums with some seed funding?
Well, I don't have a specific example, and this is a very good question, because one of the things that you have to address is how to fund the functioning of the forum. Many countries deal with this taking part of the budget from some department from the office of the Prime Minister or the President, and they use the resources of that office to make the forum work, giving them, for example, a web page or an email, or having someone that is taking care of the business of the multi-stakeholder forum. That has the advantages that you don't need to look for additional funding from somewhere else, but it has the downside that the people in these offices have a lot of work, have lots of demands from different other actors within government and outside government, and they may not take as much care of the OGP forum as if you have your own staff to manage the forum with their own resources, with their own offices and clerical staff, etc. However, to have your own offices, your own clerical staff, you need resources. So I think that addresses a key question, and one we should be discussing more, because until now I don't see a promising practice in that area.
And do you think that funding is necessary to start out one of these forums? Can it start with no additional resources, or what kind of resources are needed?
Well, the sort of resources that you need is someone that is keeping track of the agenda, someone that has the capacity to communicate with stakeholders that are represented within the forum, someone that can bridge between civil society and government. So in fact, you don't need lots of resources to doing this, but you need some resources. So to begin with, I think is the most practical way to doing it is the leading organization within government can share some of those resources with the national multi-stakeholder forum. If you are lucky enough to get some extra resources, well, that's even better because you can have more permanent staff that is mainly focused on making the forum work. So it could be a good idea to start small with shared resources and try to fund the forum in later stages.
Okay, Ernesto, we're entering the last stretch of this Facebook Live Q&A. Please send us your questions through the comments. If you want to continue this conversation through Twitter, we're using the hashtag OGPCollaborate. So we have another question from Guatemala. Does Guatemala comply with open government? I think because we're talking about multi-stakeholder forums here, I'll just direct the questions towards the topic that we're talking about. And does Guatemala comply with multi-stakeholder forum?
Well, they have a multi-stakeholder forum. They are one of the countries that meet very frequently.
Yeah.
In fact, they meet monthly at least. So yes, they have a very active multi-stakeholder forum, especially in the country context. It has been a time with lots of actors wanting to participate with government in developing the OGP agenda. So I would say that yes, there is quite a strong forum in Guatemala now.
And I think there's also a big commitment from civil society to expand the participation in the forum to go outside Guatemala City. And I think that poses challenges as civil society on how to include more members, how to get involved in decision-making processes. I don't think as civil society it's easy for us to be able to find common ground that presents their own challenges. But I think in Guatemala, and I congratulate civil society that they're really making an effort to include more people and to set up decision-making processes and work closely with the government. Ernesto, since we're about to finalize this Q&A, and in case there are no other questions, what would be your final recommendations for those seeking to strengthen their existing forums, or those countries that want to establish a new multi-stakeholder forum for OGP?
I will begin by saying creating a multi-stakeholder forum, it's not easy. Establishing the ground rules for interaction, establishing how people are going to be selected for participating in the forum, establishing even the rules for decision making, how far the forum can take decisions and what matters. Those are very contentious issues that have to be dealt with early on, so that you don't have a breakdown in the midway. So the first thing that I would recommend is, of course, read the handbook, because you don't have to reinvent everything. There are experiences there already. Talk to your peers in other countries that have some experience with doing this. Second, you have to plan carefully. You have to get sufficient political support within your government, so that this process is not a surprise. It's not something that is seen as a crazy idea from someone. You have to have political backing. That's very, very important. And then, when you have a good plan to develop your forum, you can begin with detailing how the forum is going to work. There are some options there. You can create a forum by administrative decision. You can create a forum within an existing participation mechanism. You can start anew with a new structure, a new, completely new and dedicated participation mechanism for open government. So you have to understand your institutional context. You have to understand where the relations between government and civil society are in a given moment of time, and how strong is your civil society, and how prepared are different actors within government and outside government to establish a permanent dialogue with actors that are not commonly heard in government. So I would say that's the main challenge. You have to plan, and you have to understand your context very well, and try to learn from other people's experiences. And the handbook, the main idea of the handbook was to put forward some of those experiences in one place, so that you can consult it in a very friendly way to make your life a bit easier. It will not resolve all the problems that you are going to face in developing your multi-stakeholder forum, but at least it will help you to ask the questions that are key for developing that forum.
Yeah, and thank you, Ernesto. And I think I really encourage you to consult the handbook. We have it in a PDF, in RTF, in open data format, so you can reuse it. We also have a database where we're capturing in an ongoing fashion the experiences of forums. So if you take a look at the database and feel that the information there is not accurate to what your country is experiencing right now, please let us know. We have also an EPUB that Ernesto is showing. And we got another question, and now it's from Peru. Is there any experience ensuring the participation of political decision makers from the government? In Peru, we have a good relation with the technical staff, but then the political higher-ups disappeared.
Well, that's a very good question, and unfortunately, that's one of the main challenges of establishing a multi-stakeholder forum, because as it meets regularly and has may tend to have a very technical agenda, the political leadership tend to not participate very actively on this. So my suggestion would be to try to have within the forum representation from higher up political leadership that is specifically considered not to have people that can replace or represent that person. You're going to have the minister for the presidency, for example. You could establish the rule that he cannot send some other people to represent him. If he goes, he can participate in the discussions. If he sends someone, that someone can hear, but he's not going to be participating in the discussions. So you create a sort of incentive for the political leadership to be present, maybe not in all the meetings, but maybe twice a year to have the presence of the political leadership would be very important.
Kind of like what we do in OGP with our steering committee, where we have working level meetings that occur more often than the ministerial level ones. So perhaps in the case of Peru, you could have a once a year, twice a year ministerial level meeting when you hit a major milestone. And that's a way of involving them and getting them to know OGP, to know the work that you're all doing. So we have 5 more minutes. Are there any other questions you guys have?
If not, I must say that I think it's interesting to understand that the multi-stakeholder forum is going to be alive, and it's going to mutate, and it's going to change over time. So I think that you should try to be very realistic on how are you going to set up the forum. Try to involve really key actors in that forum, and then try to establish as a policy that you are going to make the forum function better over time. So you can start small
Yeah.
with a limited vision of what the multi-stakeholder wants to address and the resources it will have, etc. But plan ahead how to move the forum into being really an OGP or an open government space for discussion, for reflection, and even to generate new ideas. So maybe starting small and then growing it up could be a good idea in many places.
Well, thank you, Ernesto, and thank you all for your participation. We invite you to visit the OGP blog, where you will find first-hand experiences of stakeholders in Honduras, Georgia, Uruguay, and Cote d'Ivoire. We are seeking to capture experiences from people that are involved in multi-stakeholder forums or wish to have a multi-stakeholder forum in their country. So please feel free to contact us if you would like to contribute to our blog. And finally, I'd like to announce that we will be conducting the workshop Multi-Stakeholder Forums, Fostering a Partnership to Advance Participation, Innovation, and Accountability in OGP during the Paris Summit. We will be advertising more details in case you want to join us for that workshop in Paris. And if you wish to know more about our upcoming events and research on multi-stakeholder forums, please look out for the OGP Collaborate hashtag in social media. We thank you all for your participation and have a good one. Goodbye from Mexico City. Thank you all for your participation.